afternoon, good morning, and welcome to anybody who may be watching on today's recording. I welcome you to another National Institute for Congestion Reduction webinar. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the topic of supply side management of auto of auto traffic with our presenter Srinivasa Sankari. Let me tell you a little bit more about Srinivasa. He is a senior research engineer at at Texas A&M Transportation Institute and has over 30 years of experience as a professional engineer and researcher in the field of traffic signal operations, hardware in the loop simulations, and connected vehicle initiatives. So with that, I am going to hand the presentation over to Srinivasa. So go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for being a gracious host. And I have to say that the introduction part from you was really, really, really smooth. It almost sounded like the safety instructions we get from flight attendants, as smooth and as clear as that. So, but thanks.
Maybe I have another opportunity for some employment.
So thank you for the logistics part of it. Good morning, good afternoon, where you're all at. So as Stephanie mentioned, my name is Srinivasa Sankari. The other researchers in this project were Samira Ziadidegan, who was a graduate student with us, who did a significant amount of the simulations in this project, as well as the data analysis and data reduction for this. And was also supported by David Florence, who supervised Samira in the work that she did. And the three of us were overall responsible for this project. We are in the business of trying to address traffic congestion at traffic signals. Traffic congestion is primarily a function of the demand and available capacity. Capacity at traffic signals is primarily a function of the number of lanes that are available, but then under certain conditions, it's also the link lengths that are available for us. One of the primary concerns that we have is with respect to closely spaced intersections when traffic just backs up from one intersection to the other. And just by increasing the number of lanes downstream, sometimes that may not help. It's primarily a function of demand and additional demand that may come up, not just from the upstream intersections, but also what else is going on in between. As you can see, this is a setup that we're going to talk about a lot today, but we also have, between two closely spaced intersections, we do have another link that is coming in that is also feeding in to, when they turn right, to the intersections downstream there. So this frequently backing up of traffic does cause some problems like what we call as green starvation. What is green starvation? Primarily when you have an upstream intersection, when they do get a green, but they cannot proceed through because there is queue backed up all the way. This is a picture that actually was taken 2 days back at this intersection to illustrate this issue. This happens pretty frequently, and of course, a closer examination of this particular scenario also shows that downstream there is a railroad grade crossing and there's a train crossing at the time, so that also caused the situation. But having said that, this situation of traffic backing up and an upstream signal not being able to take advantage of a green indication happens pretty frequently. So this particular research was trying to see how we could address situations like this. And when we're trying to address this, what are the various strategies that can improve this situation? Have to be a little concerned about any strategies that you deploy. How long can you deploy these things? How often can you deploy these things? And where exactly are these strategies to be deployed? Anything that we do in traffic operations does have an effect, not just here, but elsewhere. So we have to, those are some of the factors that need to be considered before we develop and deploy any strategies to manage oversaturated conditions. Undersaturated conditions are fairly easier to do because you do have some availability of space and time. But in oversaturated conditions, you're constrained on both those ends. So we have to look at additional intersections and additional locations where the impacts of any strategy to deploy, how they would come out. So one of the first things that we have is that in case you do have queues backing up like this, what are some mitigation strategies? The first thing is, okay, if there is no space for vehicles to go through, what can we do to make sure nobody else gets the green at that time? As you can see at the tail end of the link between the intersection on the right and the left, you do see a two small square. Let me see if I can point out with the pointer. Oh, okay. You can see a couple of small detectors that were installed there. So once we see some activity on those detectors there, where we identify that the queue has backed up to that, what can we do? One option is to make sure nobody else comes into that link because there is no space there. That can be accomplished by a series of force off, where if you are in those movements, you force them off, and then you omit those things. So basically, you are having only one set of movements out there which don't add any more demand to this link. That's one option that we can, one strategy that we can have. The second strategy is that at the downstream link, where we have the problems there, you use a strategy called flush. So once you have queue backed up here, you bring on the two movements that can alleviate this particular queuing problem there. So that's a flush pattern. So that's the other strategy we can use. And then, of course, what happens if we do both? Not only do we keep more traffic from coming in and filling up in the link, but also at the same time flush the traffic that we can do, so that you can potentially try to address these strategies for a shorter period of time. As I mentioned earlier, some of the considerations in these are not only where all do you use your strategies, but how long do you use the strategies? Because anything, we have to consider those things so that the impact on the adjacent intersections is minimal. So this basically, when we are using these strategies, what we need to look at is how effective are each of these strategies. If you only do where we do the metering, you could have wastage of green on the other side. And if you only clear the queues that we have by only doing the flush pattern, you could potentially have additional delays out there. So again, the issue is to see what we can do to minimize the duration. We do realize that whenever we try to do strategies on multiple locations, it tends to disrupt a few things elsewhere. The objective is to find a fine balance in this disruption so that we can do a little bit more good than harm when we deploy these strategies. So in order to test some of these thoughts out, we looked at some locations, and luckily for us, here in College Station, we had a location for us that was right in the middle of our campus to meet these, to have these problems. There were a couple of intersections there where even without any other factors, during normal peak traffic, because of the closely spaced intersections, the eastbound traffic that is there from Olson, which is there on the left side, going towards Wellborn Road, which is on the right side, and that is located right out here. So this is the area that we're talking about. And I'll zoom in a little bit more and show some more in a bit. But there's a lot of traffic that backs up from the right intersection on the right side to the left. But what makes this more of a challenge also is that at both these intersections, there is significant amount of traffic in other directions also coming in towards these intersections. So frequently, vehicles that are there that are going eastbound at Olson, they do have a significant amount of times when they do get the green, but they don't get to go. This is another description or illustration of the layout we're talking about. We're primarily focusing on on these two intersections that are here. The queue backs up from this intersection up to the intersection here, and the traffic that's coming out on eastbound traffic does not get a chance to use the green. And by the time the green ends, the queue may start to move a little bit, and the traffic from the southbound left again comes in and fills up here. So that's the primary problem here. Secondly, there's, especially in the PM peak, as you can say, this is right in the middle of campus here. There's a lot of traffic that is coming southbound on Wellman Road here. That does take up a significant amount of green time. And similarly, you also do have a decent amount of traffic going westbound out here. So this intersection of Wellborn and George Bush Drive, as I illustrated here, describes it here, gets hit by traffic from literally from three directions at least, and sometimes maybe even the northbound too. That is during the normal operations. Having said that, this particular location is also characterized by tremendous amount of large number of special events. As you can see, that you do have some significant sports facilities out there. You have Kyle Field on the top right here, which has a capacity of over 100,000 spectators. To go with that, we have a baseball field here, we have a softball field here, and we have track and everything here. So this area is completely filled up with special events throughout the year. To add to that, we also have the Reed Arena here, which is where we have all the graduation ceremonies and other special events that happen. So these are 4 special events. And of course, we have a huge parking lot out here, along with the parking garage here, which not only during special events, but during regular times, frequent attract a significant amount of traffic and send out frequent amount of traffic. And for many of these traffic generators here, this intersection of where is my mouse? This link out here between Olson and Wellborn is the primary link that they tend to use to go to the south of town. And hence, there's a significant amount of queuing that happens there. So hence, this is the area of focus for this research. To make things more interesting, we also have a railroad track that goes north-south along Wellborn Road, where we have up to 20 to 24 trains a day, and that does disrupt traffic significantly. So in order to address this project, we went ahead and collected significant amount of data from the City of College Station, starting with the signal timing sheets from City of College Station. We also use the signal performance measures that City of College Station uses from their ITERIS portal, and we got information about the turning movement counts at the data at these 2 intersections. We spent a significant amount of time at the intersection to get an idea of the queuing that happens there. We wanted to make sure we calibrate the model and mimic the queuing that has happened there in the existing conditions. And we then coded all this information into a VSIM simulation model, where we not only coded this intersection, the 2 intersections that we have in mind were actually these 2, but we wanted to look at the impacts of anything that we do at these 2 intersections and the adjacent intersections. But we coded another intersection to the east of it, that is called Houston, and another immediate intersection to the north and south along Wellborn Road. And we programmed, in order to add realism to the simulation, instead of using the VSIM simulation models controllers, we actually used the model with an actual virtual controller that was built into the VSIM, the Econolytes ASC3 virtual controllers. And we programmed all the 5 controllers with exactly the field settings that were there and the controllers in the field. We calibrated the volumes and so as to mimic the queuing that was happening in the field. And we also spent a decent amount of time making sure that we calibrated the model in a variety of other ways, including some of these lane changing behaviors, so as to mimic exactly to get the queuing as it was happening in the field. One of the examples that we see, at least, and again, I'm not an expert in VSIM. Our researcher is David Florence, who actually is still on the line, I think, and Samira were the experts in this, and they went through and they modeled, made some changes in the way the vehicles yield to each other, so as to mimic exactly what was happening in the field. As I mentioned, we already used the ASC3 controller for modeling each of these intersections. And what we ultimately did was, in terms of implementing in the model, we implemented what we call a low-level preemption to implement these strategies. We say low-level preemption because these intersections do have other levels of preemption. That is, rail preemption is the highest level of preemption that is being used out there. So we wanted to make sure that in case we wanted to go towards using not trying to simulate rail preemption, we have that. So that is the highest level of preemption. Plus, we also have emergency vehicles going through that intersections. So our preemption that we used out here was at a lower level compared to all those things. The two detectors that we saw that we are at the upstream end of the link between Wellborn and Olson, they basically we were looking at the occupancy on those detectors. In order to, once the occupancy reaches a certain threshold, we would then call the low level preemption. And once the occupancy goes below a certain level, it would mean that the queue is cleared, and then we take the preemption out. During the low level preemption, we would basically rest in those dual phases. For the metering part of it, it would be basically would be phase 1 and phase 6 as the westbound left and westbound through is what would be on, and at the wellbound for the flush, it would be phase 3 and phase 8, which would be the movements to flush the traffic. We also then programmed the preemption to make sure that we had a proper exit strategy, so as to these two intersections were running coordinated. So we wanted to make sure that anytime we go into preemption, when we come out of it, we go through transition, and that can take a significant amount of time. So we selected the proper settings so that the exit strategy from preemption to ensure that we come back into coordination as quickly as possible. Second thing is that when we do, as mentioned earlier, we have to be mindful anytime we do something like this in terms of strategies to modify, to address an issue. If that happens very frequently, it tends to disrupt the system. So we configured the controller so that this low-level preemption would not happen very frequently, and we did some simulation runs to address that. So in terms of strategies that we used in the simulation model, we basically compared to the baseline scenario. Second was we looked at the treatment of metering at Olson to see, and we would do that for two types of reservice. We do that, okay, this does not come on every 5 seconds or every 250 seconds. Those are two things that we looked at to make sure there are at least about 2 cycles or so between them. Similarly, for the flush pattern also at Wellborn, we looked at only that at 2 types of reservice, from very short 5 seconds as well as 250 seconds. And then we looked at strategies used at both locations, metering as well as flush, and with a shorter reservice time and a longer reservice time. Those are the strategies that were used in the simulation model. Each of the simulation models were run for an hour with about 15 minutes of warm-up time, and those are the 4 scenarios that we looked at. And we had about 5 simulation runs for each of those scenarios. Next, I'll start talking about what some of those findings are. How did the treatments perform? At the location of the Olson, where there was on the eastbound, at the one on the west side, where we had the metering tactic going on, looking at the eastbound movement, which is the movement that we were most concerned about. That was a movement which was getting a green indication, was not able to move. This is looking at throughput for that movement for the eastbound, and at throughput we do see that for each of these strategies, from the baseline onwards, whenever we did that, we basically were able to improve the throughput a little bit. When we did the treatment, only the metering treatment at Olson, there was a modest improvement in throughput. But when we did only the flush treatment at Wellborn and no metering treatment, the throughput improved a little bit. And again, by adding both those things, throughput improved a little bit more. as much as we would think, when we look at the impact of this on the southbound left at Olson, there is a significant demand of left-hand turning traffic there. You do see that when we have a metering treatment only at Olson, throughput decreases. That is natural, because what is happening is that you are not allowing the people to turn left, and that is why throughput decreases slightly. So that was expected. But however, when we start treating the flush, implementing the flush pattern at the downstream intersection, throughput, even for the southbound left, tend to increase. So overall, for both the critical movements at Olson, uh, by having both treatments implemented, we tended to increase the throughput. Similarly, if we are looking at the downstream intersection, this is Wellborn Road, also, as we go through these four types of four scenarios, the treatment where the scenario where we had both the treatments implemented tended to increase the throughput for the eastbound through, which is natural because we're using a flush pattern. And same was the case for the eastbound through and eastbound left hand. Uh, the same. What this graph shows is a replication of what we showed earlier, about how, but in terms of percentages wise, about how these the changes there in the treatments for each of this eastbound through at Olson and southbound through at Olson, and same time eastbound through at Wellborn Road and eastbound left. So this is the same movement. This is just a replication of the previous two slides, but in terms of percentage wise. Uh, Apart from looking at only the movements that are of interest to us, we wanted to look at what happens at the whole intersection as a whole. And at Olson, when the scenario where we deployed both the treatments, it tends to uh, improve the throughput a little bit, uh, but not as much improvement as it was for the eastbound movements. And similarly, at Wellborn Road, when we do deploy both the treatments, overall intersection throughput tended to decrease a little bit. And this goes to the thing that uh, in when we are dealing with traffic and any opportunities to try to improve traffic operations, there's no free lunch there. If you gain something, you're going to lose something somewhere. So at the overall intersection level, throughput tended to decrease a little bit when we deployed both the treatment or deploy the treatments at both the intersections. That was throughput. When we start looking at delays, yes, the delay when the flush pattern seems to have the biggest impact in reduction of delay for at Olson, where we are decreasing from the baseline and only metering when from this compared to those two scenarios. When we do deploy the flush pattern, delay tends to decrease a little. Delay tends to decrease. However, when we do both, delay is slightly more compared to only the flush pattern. But that is just the way it happens. Is that whenever you do both, you do tend to. What happens in this scenario is that you are doing the metering at Olson, and when you do metering, you do tend to increase the delay for some movements. However, at George Bush, uh, when we are doing these special treatments, especially the flush treatments, it is tending to increase the overall intersection delay. And that is on the face of it, that is not a desirable thing. Having said that, the objective that we have is that we do have a problem about queuing between these two intersections, and so we need to start looking at it as those. That's one of the primary benefits of these treatments. But the models did show at an intersection level that they do tend to increase delay a little. We went back and looked at conflicting movements to see whenever this happens, how much of a impact it has at these locations. Southbound. The southbound movement, especially during the PM peak at Wellborn Road, is a very critical movement. And when we do deploy these strategies, they do tend to increase delays for some other movements, and that is because we are giving a priority for the eastbound movements. Southbound movements tend to increase the delay a little bit. And we started looking at any of the adjacent intersections. There was not. The good thing about this, there was not much of an impact of these strategies at the downstream intersections there. So we wanted to make sure that anything that we do, we do no harm, as I call it, at downstream intersections. We also looked at, okay, what's happening with respect to the signal operations, to see what's happening with that. And so this graph kind of illustrates the green time usage at the Olsen Boulevard, that is at the upstream intersection, where for each of these phases, and what we are doing is that during the strategy for when using both strategies, or we are using both the metering, that is, we bring on phase 1 and 6 out there. So as you can see, whenever you are in this blue pattern, which is the flush. Okay, I probably got the legend wrong here. So the blue should be the metering scenario only, and the purple should be only the flush. So as you can see, whenever you do have the metering going on, both for phase 1 and phase 6, they do tend to increase the usage of green time. So that's, I apologize for this was a graph I created yesterday, so I messed up on the legend for that. Similarly, you do see that whenever we are increasing the purple time is when we are doing the flush pattern. So phase 3 is increasing at that time, and similarly phase 8 is increasing at that time. But overall, there's not been a significant change in the operations other than what we expect. Overall, then we also looked at the big total network, to see what was going on there. We looked at overall because of these strategies, overall delay increased slightly, but one of the things that we didn't get a chance to present out here was what are happening in the queue lengths. And then queue lengths, our target was how do we address some of the queuing issues there, especially between these two intersections, and those tended to improve significantly, as well as reducing the delay for those movements. This slide shows not only the total delay but also latent delay, and latent delay, I believe, is the delay that is experienced by vehicles that are not able to enter the network, and this graph shows the big picture of what's happening there. So some of the key takeaways from this project is that, number one, by using an actual signal controller, even though it is virtual, it gives an opportunity to try out strategies that you would be able to really test out in the real world. That's the first thing. Number two, oversaturated intersections do require a significant amount of attention when we are modeling it, not only to mimic the existing conditions, but also to look at the impacts of anything that we do on adjacent intersections. The primary objective of this research was to look at what if anything can be done to improve the situation for the eastbound movements at the two intersections where they are closely spaced, where the traffic is backing up between these two intersections. And the treatments that we did implement and the simulation model did increase throughput for this. If we are only doing a metering at the intersection at Olsen, that did not have much of an impact. But if we do both, then it has a much bigger impact on the overall network for these two movements. And this is a classic problem, right? When we try to solve a problem at intersection 1, it tends to go to a different intersection. So while with the treatment, or the combination of treatments that we tried here did reduce the delay at the upstream intersection at Olsen, it did increase the delay at the downstream intersection. The question is that within tolerable limits or not? So that's we do realize that delays tend to move to other spots. But on the whole picture is that oversaturated networks, when we are modeling and we're implementing treatments, you do have to be very careful about the impacts of any strategies you deploy, look at the other intersections, and look at the intersection as a whole. And as with any research project, what are some questions that we have at the end? Number one is, um, how exactly what the preemption settings in a controller have a significant number of parameters in there, and we did not get a chance to test out all of them in here to see what, if any, of those settings that are there in the preemption would have on the overall performance. That's one thing. And preemption tends to be more of a stronger response for a strategy. A softer response would be like priority treatment. If we were to implement a priority, would that make things better, or would that not make as much improvement as we would want it to? So those are some of the things, the questions that are there. Currently, this was tested out and simulated for a real network that we have in town here. How would some treatments like this work where for different spacings? If they're further apart, if they're closer, what will that do? And what happens when you have changes in volumes? How would that do? This project also did not look at simulating rail activity in the corridor, which has a significant impact on the operations. That was just outside the scope of our work. But if we were to try to do this, how would that work? And so we are fortunate. We are fortunate that our team has another opportunity with some funding that was available and the lessons that we learned from this project to actually try and implement some of these. The researchers, David Florence, is actually leading a small project to actually deploy some strategies, these strategies like this in the field. And the city of College Station uses different controllers. They use Siemens, or you call them Unix controllers right now. And we are implementing a combination of peer-to-peer communications to deploy priorities at the priority strategies at Welbert Road and George Bush, and those settings strategies have actually been deployed this week, and we're in the process of trying to see how they work. And hopefully we'll get a chance to make a presentation on that sometime down the road when we have an opportunity after the project is done. So I would like to actually thank the sponsors for giving us this opportunity to make this to do this project, and I do acknowledge the contributions from our research team, Samira and David. I'll be glad to take any questions from you all. If I can't answer them, I'll find out the answer and I'll get back to you. So, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for all of the great information and about that upcoming research as well. Just as a reminder, we've got that Q&A box located in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in any questions and or comments you have. We do have a few questions already queued up, so let's just start with them and we'll see if any more happen to come in. Did you study any times when these strategies would cause disruptions?
Um, we looked at intersections to the east and the north and the south. The intersection to the east was the one that was the closest, and uh, when we tried it out at 5 seconds, we tended to see a little bit more disruption, which is why we focused on what our recommendation was to have these strategies at a reservice time of 250 seconds, so that we would cause minimum disruption. So when we went to that 250-second disruption reservice time, we did not see any noticeable disruption to traffic operations.
Great. Next question. Did you have any consultations with the signal operators about the strategies to use?
Um, the signal operators in this case was City of College Station, and of course we also consulted with other operators in the area, the Texas Department of Transportation, other consultants, and a general recommendation that we got was, if we are deploying it in the field, especially at a location like this where a significant number of preemptions were being held, would be to stay away from preemption, but try priority. Now, we went with preemption primarily because we have we wanted to make sure that the strategy that we try would be implemented by the controller in a timely fashion, and we have a very good understanding of it. Uh, Priority was still something which even now we are trying to understand some parameters that's a lot more complex. That's why we wanted to, as a first level, to get a better understanding of the impact of these strategies at a higher level. We went with the preemption, but one of the recommendations was to look at priority, which is why for the second project, the project that we are working on, we have implemented priority, and we want to see how that works out.
Great. And then it looks like we've got one final question. It says, did the preemption have any negative impact on the operations of the intersections?
Yes, and this primarily does have an effect when the intersections or the network there is already completely saturated. Um, the particular network actually experiences atypical loading in that there are classes that are let out which actually have a significant impact on peaking at times that we don't not expect traditionally. Traditional peaking happens during the AM peak and the PM peak, with some during the off peak. But here we have students coming for classes at different times, going at different times. That causes significant amount of loading happens at unexpected times. And during some of those times, when queues back up, especially on the north and south approach at Wellborn Road, when we do go for these kind of strategies where we go for a flush pattern, uh, it tended to increase the delay for those. So things that need to be considered include to see when you can deploy strategies like this so that the disruption is minimized.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So we're going to give you all about 19 minutes back in your afternoon. So I hope you greatly appreciate that. I am going to open up the evaluation for each of you on your end. So go ahead and take a few moments to complete that evaluation, as the feedback provided is not only important to our presentation, to our presenter today, but to the entire NICR webcast series. We do have a webinar scheduled in the month of May, working to get that information up, posted on the website as quickly as possible. So on behalf of the National Institute for Congestion Reduction, thank you so much for attending today's webinar, and we'll see you all real soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Bye bye.